Hello, everybody. Many thanks for being here and for inviting me. I'm very much aware of the timing and that probably by German standards, most of the audience is thinking more in dinner. I'm Spaniard, so, no problem. But then I will try to be, if not, I will try not to be too long, but especially to be provocative. Let me share with you the perspective from the Club of Rome on the topics which have been mentioned and on the Jena Declaration and the activities related to it. I'm here not only as myself, but also on behalf of my dear friend and South African colleague, Mampela Rampele, co-president of the Club of Rome. And for us, it's an important moment because this year, 2022, is the 50th anniversary of the publication of the Limits to Growth. We just launched yesterday a new report. I mean, we have published many reports since 1972. And there is one, by the way, that I recommend especially because it was written in 1979, but it's still absolutely valid in its orientation and in its analysis, and it is titled, and the title is worth of it, No Limits to Learning. It was very much a response by the Club of Rome to the realization that the success of the Limits to Growth, we sold millions of copies of that book. Nobody knows exactly how many, but if you know a little bit the book, it's not a thriller. So selling millions of copies of a book like that is quite an achievement, something between 13 and 30. So big editorial success, big civilizational failure. And this is where the learning what we already know comes from. Because, and Aurelio Pereira, our founder, realized that very, very soon that the intention of the Limits to Growth was not understood at all. If I read it from now, from this new report that we launched yesterday in Milano, by the way, titled Limits and Beyond, and my contribution to that book, I am the co-editor with Professor Ugo Bardi of Firenze. My contribution is titled exactly this, Learning What We Already Know. Well, we have learned these 50 years that it's not enough to have a very good argument and a rigorous simulation of a set of scenarios and give some very interesting and very innovative instruments to think about the future. That is by far not enough to change the world. We learned that. And why didn't we learn then? Why didn't the world learn? The responsibility of the Club of Rome, and I'm here to challenging ourselves, to be honest, is to ask better questions. In the spirit provided by true poetry, by Rainer Maria Rilke said, 1 century ago in his letters to young poets, don't look too fast for the answers, for the responses. You have to leave the questions. You leave deeply the questions. And if you do that, maybe one day you will realize that without having noticed it, you are leaving the responses. And this is what we do. We try to ask better questions. The question that the Limits to Growth raised, and is still valid, is the dominant model of human development, quote unquote, based on industrialization, exploitation of people, systematic and science-based, by the way, exploitation of nature and people, based on colonization, based on the dominance, most often brutal, by the West. Is that model of human development extensible to the whole of humanity? Will it work? And in a way, what was not understood is that what we attempted to do at the time was to open the space of possibilities. The idea of let's try different future scenarios was, okay, in many cases the scenarios will lead to collapse, but there are others. So strongest message that was not heard is that we, humanity, can decide what kind of scenario. But definitely it looks like it's not so easy, or it was not so easy from the institutional establishment that existed at the time and how it has evolved. Institutional meaning in politics, in business, but also in education and in culture. Let's be honest. From that establishment, it's not so easy to learn certain things. Karl Deutsch said that power is the ability not to have to learn anything. And the first time I heard that, I was, wow. Power, I repeat, power is the ability not to have to learn anything. In present times, I would nuance a little bit that sentence, just complement it by saying, well, power may be the ability to frame what we're allowed to learn up to the point which is not dangerous to power only. And this is why we use the word learning. This is why that report, 1979 report that nobody knows, was titled No Limits to Learning. And this is why now in the Club of Rome we think humanity faces a huge learning exercise. But don't take me wrong, and again a provocation for you, learning is not what happens. It's not what happens when we are taught. Learning and teaching might have some relation, but often teaching is only the reproduction of the mental frameworks of which we are prisoners. And there is no harder jail than the mental ones. So this is what we have to question. If we take seriously, and we do, the Jena Declaration, this is how do we get out from the mental frameworks which have built modernity with a capital M in the way it exists today, and which is leading us to the wall, as you know very well, and as is more and more obvious every day, from crisis to crisis and so on. And let me say that one thing we learned from modern science, but from modern science analyzing life with a capital L, is that life evolves and it alternates periods of slow evolution, of slow changes, with periods in which there are incredible changes and incredible reconfigurations. This is what modern evolutionary biology tells us, and I think we can use that metaphor. We are at a critical point in which we have so many emergencies on us. And 3 years ago, the Club of Rome decided to adopt the slogan, emergence from emergency, betting on the capacity, on the human capacity to emerge from all those emergencies in a completely different reconfiguration of ways of doing, of ways of relating, in a cultural shift. And this is where culture gets in a cultural shift which would change our culture from one of separation and competition and exploitation to one, and I love that you used the word attunement, to a culture attuned to life with a capital L, which means a relational culture, because we know since the beginning of times, all cultures know that our well-being and our health depend on the quality of our relationships, not on the accumulation of material goods. And this is why thinking about this process of emergence, this is why we are trying to push honestly, all institutions, we have some capacity to influence. I'm not saying we have a lot of capacity to influence, but wherever we go, we try to push in that direction because, and I like that the title of the conference is Cultures for Sustainable Futures, because it implies that there are many other cultures for unsustainable futures. So let's not cheat ourselves that culture will make it. We have cultures in political domain, in business domain, in educational domains, etc., which are working for the perpetuation, in fashion, in everyday lives, etc., which are working for the perpetuation of this crazy game in which we are, this game of suicide, as now Antonio Guterres is saying. And just to finish, I wanted to share with you, besides these ideas which are, as I said, in this Limits and Beyond new report, that we initiated 1.5 years ago, but it's not really important because this is a process more than anything else, something that we call the fifth element. Why the fifth element? Because, well, we have to learn from life. It's learning from life, life for learning. And it's also, of course, a tribute to all wisdoms which are out there since millennia, a tribute to a potential combination of those wisdoms which are there and what modern science, parts of modern science, the parts of modern science which are more attuned to life can do. And this fifth element is not a silver bullet. This is not our solution. This is our way of living the question again. What is the question is how could we imagine that the learning processes that we need to happen could happen? And we don't have the lens, to say, oh, we are omnipotent and we know exactly. But there are some signs which are interesting. And I want to finish with an optimistic message because I really think that the cultural change is there. We just don't see it. And maybe it's okay that we don't see it so much. Maybe it's okay that it's not in the media. But from this audience, the Jena Declaration initiative, it's very important that we listen carefully to the silent melody, as Karima Kadawi calls it. That silent melody of people almost everywhere trying to find their own pathways towards equitable well-being, equitable human well-being within a healthy planet, within a healthy biosphere. And there are 4 elements that we have identified. One, it looks like it's a good idea to put upside down the model of knowledge creation, a little bit like you mentioned, The questions are no longer the ones that defined the academic world at the end of the 18th and beginning of 19th century, among other places, notably in this university. No, the questions are no longer those, and the disciplines which were created at the time are not responding to the questions of today. Second, so start from the questions of today, not from the questions of yesterday, and start from the questions that people on the ground have. Second, I think that, and I'm very much aware of the paradox of what I'm going to say, being myself a middle-aged white man. But my feeling, stronger and stronger feeling, is that the momentum to transform for this cultural shift, this paradigm shift that has been mentioned by Luis, will come from women and younger generations. And if you listen carefully, it's pretty obvious. And from most of the world. You remember in those times that we had the First World, the Second World, and the Third World, all the rest of the world. That rest of the world has always been, and now more than ever, most of the world. 6 out of 7 people on the planet are not Western. So we have to go down from our moral arrogance based on military and economic power to accept that their worldviews are extremely relevant, whether we like that or not, for this paradigm shift. And the very last is that this fifth element is based on a very simple idea, that we have to bet on humanity. A central element of the approach is to trust the humanity of everybody. Stop thinking that people are problematic because they don't know, because there are too many, because they don't know, they don't understand, they vote for Trump, etc., etc., etc. Bet on the trust humanity of everybody and trust the capacity of everybody. And betting on that, there is a huge perspective for what Aurelio Peccei called the human revolution. He was a wise man. The year he died, in 1984, he wrote a very last book, which is a book of conversations with Daisaku Ikeda, a Japanese poet and philosopher, titled Before It Is Too Late. In that book, they call for a human revolution, the revolution of our mindsets. So this is what we are working on, and I'm very happy to be here, Beto, and work with you all in that direction. Thank you so much.